Hey, globetrotters and curious souls, strap in and grab your popcorn, because we're about to take a wild ride into the underbelly of the world's power players. Today, we're counting down the top 20 most corrupt countries on the planet. We're not just touring the globe, we're decoding the Corruption Perceptions Index, the ultimate database that reveals the hideouts of corruption pirates. The CPI is like GPS for navigating through foggy realms where power and deceit intertwine. It scores countries on a scale from 0 to 100, where 0 is a corruption paradise, not the kind you'd want to visit, and 100 is squeaky clean. But here's the catch. Most countries find themselves wandering far from the shores of that perfect 100, tangled in the webs of corruption. Expect tales of intrigue, drama, and a little bit of that you can't make this stuff up kind of reality that'll make your jaw drop. I promise you'll be shocked by the country that tops our list. So hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and let the countdown begin. 20th on our list is Honduras. Corruption in Honduras is a serious issue that has far-reaching consequences. Honduras ranks 157th out of 180 nations in the 2022 Corruption Perception Index released by Transparency International. This places it below every other country in Latin America and the Caribbean, except Nicaragua, Haiti, and Venezuela. Systemic corruption deprives the government of funds that could otherwise be invested in essential services like health, education, clean water, and housing. This reflects widespread issues within its public sector, impacting the nation's governance and development. The high levels of corruption in Honduras can be attributed to a combination of factors, including weak public institutions, lack of accountability, and insufficient transparency in government operations. These issues create an environment where corrupt practices can thrive, hindering efforts to combat corruption effectively. Number 19, Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan, on the Corruption Perceptions Index for 2023, scored a 23 out of 100 and ranked 154th out of 180 countries. Corruption in Azerbaijan is widely recognized as a significant issue that permeates all levels of government. This has been a persistent problem from the Soviet era to the present. The nation's oil wealth has notably contributed to the stability of Ilham Aliyev's regime, simultaneously enriching the ruling elites and facilitating lavish international events and extensive lobbying efforts abroad. The Azerbaijani laundromat scandal, involving $2.9 billion paid to foreign politicians and elites, is a notable example of the country's corruption challenges. Azerbaijan presents one of the most challenging business environments in the world. Sectors where foreign investments are concentrated, such as construction and transportation, are recognized worldwide as being very prone to corruption. Corruption exists in every sector of the economy and in every level of the Azerbaijan government. Next up is Sudan. Corruption in Sudan is substantial, as it is considered one of the most corrupt nations in the world. On Transparency International's 2022 Corruption Perceptions Index, Sudan scored 22 on a scale from 0 to 100. On the 2010 World Bank Worldwide Governance Indicators, on a 100-point scale, it scored in the single digits in every category, including 0.9 for political stability, 6.2 for rule of law, 7.2 for regulatory quality, 6.7 for government effectiveness, and 4.3 for control of corruption. In 2011, Freedom House named Sudan as one of the worst nations for human rights. The country scores low on global corruption indices, indicating widespread issues with bribery, nepotism, and misuse of power. The economy and government operations are heavily influenced by corruption, creating a challenging environment for both citizens and businesses. Efforts to combat corruption have been limited, with few concrete actions taken to address the problem effectively. 17th on our list is Eritrea. On Transparency International's 2023 Corruption Perceptions Index, Eritrea scored 21 on a scale from 0 to 100. When ranked by score, Eritrea ranked 161st among the 180 countries in the index. Corruption in Eritrea, once considered minimal and the country relatively egalitarian and corruption-free, has worsened notably since the late 1990s. Factors such as a border conflict with Ethiopia, the concentration of power, lack of press freedom, and increased state control over the economy have contributed to the growth of corruption. Efforts to combat corruption have been limited, with the regime using anti-corruption campaigns to suppress dissent rather than genuinely address the issue. Eritrea's business community is composed mainly of personal associates of the regime's economic officials, fronts for top-level officials of the ruling party, and people who enjoy the patronage of senior officers of the security and military establishments. The government controls all foreign exchanges and is virtually the only legal source of imports, a situation that makes it possible for military and government officials to profit by collaborating with illegal smugglers. Number 16, Republic of the Congo. Corruption in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which used to be an institutionalized part of the state, has been relatively lowered in recent years. However, it continues to exceed corruption in comparison to most states. For example purposes, I will give you 2 cases of corruption in insane amounts. Check this out. In June 2020, a court in the Democratic Republic of Congo found President Felix Tshisekedi's chief of staff, Vital Kamerhe, guilty of corruption. He was sentenced to 20 years hard labor after facing charges of embezzling almost $50 million of public funds. The second case is even more shocking. In November 2021, a judicial investigation targeting former President Joseph Kabila and his associates was opened in Kinshasa after revelations of alleged embezzlement of $138 million. What do you think of these numbers? Let me know in the comments. The 15th most corrupt country on our list is Zimbabwe. On Transparency International's 2022 Corruption Perceptions Index, Zimbabwe scored 23 on a scale from 0 to 100. The findings of a 2000 survey commissioned by Transparency International Zimbabwe found that Zimbabwean citizens regarded the public sector as the most corrupt sector in the country. In this survey, respondents favored the police as being the most corrupt, followed by political parties, parliament, legislative, public officials, civil servants, and the judiciary. In 2008, a Transparency International director announced that Zimbabwe loses $5 million to corruption every day. How crazy is this? The 14th country on our list is Chad. Corruption in Chad is characterized by nepotism and cronyism. Chad received a score of 20 in the 2023 Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index. According to the Human Rights Report by the U.S. Department of State, Chad's judicial system is heavily influenced by the government, causing government officials to enjoy impunity. Judges who try to uphold judicial independence face harassment and, in some cases, dismissal. Businesses reported that they have often paid bribes to influence judicial decisions. Ordinary civilians have low trust in their country's judicial system and they try avoid it. Corruption in the public services of Chad is characterized by nepotism and bribery. Bribery is common in the public services due to the low salaries of civil servants. Public works conducted by the government have been criticized by international organizations for lacking transparency and involving high levels of corruption. 13th on our list is Nicaragua. Corruption is a serious and growing problem for doing business in Nicaragua. Transparency International's 2023 Corruption Perceptions Index gave Nicaragua a score of 17. When ranked by score, Nicaragua ranked 172nd among the 180 countries in the index. The election of Sandinista leader Daniel Ortega in 2006 began a period of democratic deterioration in Nicaragua that continues today. President Ortega has consolidated all branches of government under his party's control, limited fundamental freedoms, and allowed unchecked corruption to pervade the government. Some businesses have suggested that facilitation payments are demanded from the authorities when conducting commercial activities in Nicaragua, and the government often shows favoritism towards certain well-connected companies. Next up is Turkmenistan. Corruption in Turkmenistan is considered by many independent sources a serious problem. The country is near the bottom of several annual indices that measure corruption, including the Wall Street Journal's Index of Economic Freedom. In Transparency International's 2022 Corruption Perceptions Index, Turkmenistan scored 19. According to an August 2015 statement by the U.S. Embassy in Turkmenistan, corruption is widespread in both public and private sectors in the country. There are no standard-setting consortia or organizations besides Turkmen state standards and the licensing agency. There is no independent body for filing complaints. Financial disclosure requirements are neither transparent nor consistent with international norms. Government enterprises are not required to publicize financial statements, even to foreign partners. All of the countries that were once part of the USSR face special challenges when it comes to corruption. In addition to corruption by high-level government officials who take massive bribes in exchange for awarding contracts to foreign firms, Turkmenistan is riddled with household corruption, meaning that everyday necessities like education and medicine require bribes. Bribery is so commonplace that citizens are generally oblivious to its presence or significance. Number 11 in our ranking is Comoros. The Comoros, officially the Union of the Comoros, is an archipelagic country made up of 3 islands in southeastern Africa, located at the northern end of the Mozambique Channel in the Indian Ocean. Corruption in Comoros follows the familiar patterns of state-based corruption, namely government officials abusing their political powers for private gain. You'll be shocked to learn about the level of corruption with a passport sales scheme created by former businessman Bashar Kiwan and the president of the Comoros, Abdallah Sambi. The citizenship by investment program was presented as a bilateral solution to achieve the dual objectives of developing the infrastructure of the Comoros Islands and solving the stateless resident issue in the Arab states of the Persian Gulf. Specifically, it would allow the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait to purchase citizenship for 4,000 stateless families in those countries, known as Bidoon. In return, the poor Indian Ocean archipelago would receive $200 million to be spent on development projects. However, Kiwan and the entourage of both former presidents embezzled more than $45 million of funds, as the country saw no money that went towards any development plan to better the country. It was also discovered that passports were sold through unofficial channels to any individual at the right price. 10th place goes to North Korea. North Korea is widely seen as having among the most corrupt governments in the world. It is ranked 171 out of 180 countries in Transparency International's 2022 Corruption Perceptions Index. Corruption, commonly defined as the misuse of public office for private gain, reportedly permeates the North Korean state from the central leadership down to the lowest levels of the bureaucracy and is ubiquitous even in critical sectors such as the military and the diplomatic corps. For many officials, routine bribe-taking pays the bills, Illicit earnings outstrip or even entirely replace government salaries. The country's entrepreneurial class colludes with officials in a variety of illegal or semi-legal arrangements to mobilize state enterprises or resources for private business ventures. Moreover, the regime is deeply engaged in illegal money-making activities abroad, including cybercrime, insurance fraud, counterfeiting, and drug trafficking. The ninth most corrupt country in the world is Burundi. Corruption in Burundi is deeply entrenched and systemic. Despite efforts to promote integrity and good governance, local-level relationships and informal practices by public agents continue to undermine anti-corruption programs. The corruption level in Burundi is so large that the country's ruling political party exploits corruption as a means to maintain its grip on power. Insufficient controls contribute to the persistence of corrupt practices. Even those tasked with overseeing corruption often perpetuate the same dynamics they are meant to monitor. Controllers may choose informal arrangements over formal sanctions, as challenging influential local leaders could be risky. This perpetuates a cycle of corruption. Burundi citizens' distrust of the state leads them to accept bribery when confronted with authority. Loyalty tends to favor social networks over public institutions. The government's credibility deficit further erodes confidence in formal institutions. Number 8. Haiti. Corruption in Haiti is a grave issue that significantly impacts the nation's governance and quality of life. Haiti faces one of the highest corruption rates globally, making it a challenging environment for establishing the rule of law and a sustainable democracy. According to Transparency International's 2022 Corruption Perceptions Index, Haiti's score is 17 out of 100. Haiti ranks 171st out of 180 countries in the index, indicating a severe problem with corruption. Haiti, as the Western Hemisphere's poorest country, faces multiple challenges, including corruption, gang violence, drug trafficking, and organized crime. Years of political volatility have severely undermined public finances and the rule of law. The country struggles with reconstruction efforts after natural disasters like Hurricane Matthew and the devastating 2010 earthquake. The seventh on our list is Libya. Corruption in Libya remains a significant concern. According to the 2023 Corruption Perceptions Index by Transparency International, Libya ranks 170th out of 180 countries, indicating a high level of corruption within the country. All sectors of the Libyan economy suffer from widespread corruption. The public procurement sector and the oil industry are particularly affected. Bribery and favoritism are common practices across various sectors, and unfair competition from state-owned businesses further exacerbates the situation. A recent report by The Century titled "Libya's Kleptocratic Boom" reveals a rapid expansion of illicit enterprises linked to Libya's leaders. These include activities such as human trafficking, fuel smuggling, narcotics, money laundering, currency manipulation, and the theft of billions of dollars in public assets. Efforts to combat corruption in Libya remain crucial for promoting transparency, accountability, and sustainable development. Number 6. Equatorial Guinea. Corruption in Equatorial Guinea is a grave issue, and it ranks among the worst in the world. The country has been described as an almost perfect kleptocracy, where systemic corruption prevails on an unprecedented scale. Equatorial Guinea's corruption system is unparalleled in its brazenness. A limited group of powerful individuals controls the government, diverting most of the country's revenues into their clandestine bank accounts abroad. Scholar Geoffrey Wood has gone so far as to classify Equatorial Guinea as a criminal state due to entrenched corruption. This situation is particularly dramatic because of the massive revenues generated from oil and other natural resources. Despite vast oil reserves, the nation's wealth is concentrated in the hands of an elite minority. The fifth most corrupt country is Yemen. Corruption in Yemen is a highly serious problem. According to the 2022 Corruption Perceptions Index, Yemen ranks 176 out of 180 countries, making it the most corrupt country on the Arabian Peninsula. This unfortunate distinction coincides with Yemen's status as the poorest country in the Middle East. The nation faces significant challenges, including an exceptionally high birth rate, acute child malnutrition rates, and rapidly depleting reserves of oil and water. Chatham House characterizes corruption, poverty, and inequality in Yemen as systemic. The pervasive nature of corrupt activity leaves many citizens feeling powerless. The absence of a robust system of control and accountability has allowed corruption to infiltrate both the public and private spheres. As a result, corrupt power blocks exert influence over public resources, leading to weak governance and inadequate services in sectors such as energy, communications, health, and education. Next up is Venezuela. Corruption in Venezuela is a deeply entrenched issue that permeates various levels of society. Venezuela experiences very high levels of corruption by global standards. This pervasive problem affects many aspects of the country, from government institutions to daily life. The discovery of oil in Venezuela during the early 20th century exacerbated political corruption, leading to significant economic challenges. A 2014 Gallup poll revealed that 75% of Venezuelans believed corruption was rampant within their government. Discontent with corruption was cited as one of the reasons behind the 2014 and 2017 Venezuelan protests. According to the 2022 Corruption Perceptions Index by Transparency International, Venezuela scored a mere 14 out of 100. In this ranking, Venezuela stood at 177th out of 180 countries, indicating a severe lack of honesty in the public sector. The third spot takes Syria. Corruption in Syria follows familiar patterns of state-based corruption, where government officials abuse their political powers for private gain. According to Transparency International's 2022 Corruption Perceptions Index, Syria scored a 13 on the CPI scale. This score places Syria as the second lowest, tied with South Sudan, among the 180 countries in the index. In other words, Syria's public sector is perceived to be highly corrupt. During the Syrian civil war, the country faced additional challenges related to corruption. For instance, Syria was labeled a narco state by the United States due to its involvement in cannabis cultivation in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley. Additionally, mass production of drugs within Syria occurred, and officers even administered a substance called Captain Courage to their men. Several drug shipments containing millions of pills of phenethylene were seized in different countries, with production dating back to at least 2006. Furthermore, Syrian detainees' families have been forced to pay huge bribes to a corrupt network that feeds cash into the country's security apparatus. Guards, judges, military personnel, and middlemen are part of this system, with about a quarter of those surveyed reporting extortion demands. The second place of most corrupt countries takes South Sudan. Corruption in South Sudan remains a significant challenge, affecting various sectors and undermining the nation's development efforts. South Sudan faces entrenched impunity, which fuels armed conflict, repression, and human rights violations. Community-based militias are responsible for violence, including killings, injuries, abductions, and sexual violence. Despite allegations of serious human rights violations, progress in combating impunity has been minimal. The The humanitarian community is also under attack, affecting aid workers and relief efforts. The World Bank has funded a biometrics project to clean up South Sudan's public service payroll, aiming to identify government payroll thieves. However, the fight against corruption remains an ongoing challenge, and the country's anti-corruption framework is still in its infancy. So, are you ready to see the most corrupt country in the world? Introducing Somalia. Corruption in Somalia is huge. It affects ports and airports, tax and customs collection, immigration, telecommunication, management of aid resources. According to Transparency International's 2022 Corruption Perceptions Index, Somalia scored 12 out of 100. And here are the consequences of such level of corruption. At least 6.7 million Somalis, nearly half of the country's population, grapple with acute food insecurity. Approximately 300,000 people are expected to experience a famine this spring. Over 500,000 Somali children suffer from severe malnutrition, surpassing the numbers during the 2011 famine. More than 1 million Somalis have been internally displaced due to the scarcity of food and water. They seek refuge in areas where they can access international humanitarian aid. In summary, addressing corruption remains a critical challenge for Somalia, and concerted efforts are needed to promote transparency, accountability, and good governance. If you enjoyed today's episode, hit that like button and subscribe to Place Picks for more.